Hello everyone, welcome to Anthropology Analytica. I am Dr. Arjun Bopanna, your anthropology faculty at Insights IAS. Okay, in today's video we are going to discuss the question that I had posted in the previous video. The question is, examine the impact of forest policy on tribes of India. So this week we are going to discuss the tribal India, and various questions relating to tribal India are going to be discussed this week. So today's question is a very important and most oftenly asked question, that is how the forest policy has impacted the tribes. So please understand, this question is not asking you to list or write about the forest policy itself. It's the main focus of the question over here is to understand and explain the impact of forest policy on tribes of India. So I've seen many times when this kind of question is asked and the students end up writing about forest policy, everything about forest policy, before the British, after the British, during the post-independence time, and they tend to neglect the real essence of this question. The real essence, or what is expected out of you here, is to write the impact. So when we say impact, usually, we need to look at from two angles. One, the positive impact and the negative impact. So with respect to forest policy, as you have all discussed and you might have read about it also, most of the impact of forest policy towards the tribe has been negative. Okay. But you also have to remember that later forest policy, that is after independence, after 80s, we have been trying to reform the forest laws in order to make it much more, conducive to the tribal way of life. So therefore, in this particular answer, let me just give you an idea that the impact has been both negative as well as positive. Negative up to 1980s, right from the British times and post-independence time. Okay, up to almost 1980s, the forest policies has always been negative towards the tribal way of life. After 80s onwards, when the government realized that we need to improve the relationship, or we need to reform the forest laws so as to make them more conducive towards the tribal way of life. And then we also enact later on the Forest Rights Act. Okay, so in that context, let's see what are the expectations from you in your answers. Okay, so first one is the introduction. So in the introduction, about 4 to 5 sentences, very briefly about the forest policy of India. So here we can classify it during the British time and post-independence. Okay, so just list out some of the forest laws and forest policies that were enacted during the British time and after independence, the forest laws. Even you can add Wildlife Protection Act and other Forest Protection Act, etc. to this introduction. Okay, so general introduction, just naming those acts is more than enough. You don't have to go on explaining it much more detail. Next, the next one, you will start with the impact. So you can also start the impact saying that the tribals always enjoyed a symbiotic relationship with the forest. But with the coming in of British and the British wanting to exploit the forest for their own good, they started to enact laws which tries to take away the symbiotic relationship from the symbiotic relationship between the tribes and the forest. So impact, let's then write the negative impact of forest laws. Okay, so economic impact, social impact, political impact, and impact on the social structure of the tribals. Like, I'll just take the example of social structure to just explain and elaborate on that, because otherwise economic, you will say that yes, land displacement, they were displaced from their land, it led to poverty, it led to indebtedness. Social impact, okay, it had an impact on cultural factors because many of the tribal rituals, etc., were associated with the forest. Now you remove them from the forest, so a lot of cultural features or cultural rituals, etc., got eliminated or extinct. Along with that, political impact, non-tribals coming into tribal areas, and this led to political de-empowerment of the tribals, etc. Similarly, the social structure, if you see, the tribals social structure are knit by kinship relationship. So when forest laws removed them from their traditional land, So they were denied, I mean, their kinship network got destroyed, and this led to destruction of their social structure. So like this, you will go on explaining and giving examples and case studies to substantiate your argument. So under economic, you can write indebtedness, poverty, land alienation, social impact may eradication or danger or threat to their way of life, their cultural practices, marriage tradition, etc., political, non-tribals, and their threat to their justice system, because many of the justice practices were conducted within the forest, etc. So all of that has to be written in your impact, okay, and you have to write 1 or 2 case studies to justify these arguments. Then we have to also write a note on the positive impact of the forest policies, especially after the 1980s. So when government started to realize that this symbiotic relationship was actually good for the protection of forest and not just welfare of the tribals, so they started to reorient. So we see the National Forest Policy of 1988 and thereon, where they give impetus towards tribals getting involved in forest management, joint forest management, village community being involved in forest management, and then we enact the Forest Rights Act, where it's also a type of, it is related with the forest policy. So the rights were given to the tribals, who were traditionally living in the forest and dependent on the forest. So this once again, reinforced the symbiotic relationship what was enjoyed by the tribes and the with the forest. Okay, so let me just give you some facts, because many students were asking for case studies and facts. So these are some of the important facts that you have to mention in this particular answer. So we have, during the British time, right from Lord Dalhousie, when he introduced a resolution for forest preservation, right from there we see the growth of forest policy. And 1855, 1864, Government Forest Act, 1865, all these names you can just mention here. Even if you don't write all of them, couple of them you can mention and say like this: British enacted several laws which restricted the rights of the tribals. Similarly, post-independence, we see that there were 2 phases of forest policy. The initial phases, which was almost similar to British, where they tried to deny the rights of the traditional forest dwellers, and the main objective was to exploit the forest resources. So you can mention that also. Post-independence, the first phase, like National Forest Policy 1952, Wildlife Protection Act and Forest Conservation Act, which are mainly focused on preserving the forest, and this again denied the rights to the tribals. And then later on, your Forest Policy 1988, which gave importance to joint forest management, and your Forest Rights Act 2006, again had a good or a positive impact to a larger extent, I mean, compared to the previous. So these are some facts that you have to mention in your examination or in your answer, right? And then the impact, again, whatever I have discussed very quickly, let's go through it. So it led to commercial exploitation of forest, so which used to provide raw materials to the tribals and provided a livelihood for the tribals. It was denied, okay, denied tribal the rights over their forest. Traditionally, for centuries, they enjoyed it. So all of a sudden, it was lost. It led to tribal unrest and violence, especially in central India. We read, even in our modern history, we see this, that constant tribal unrest and revolt of the tribals against the British rule. One of the major factor was the forest policy. It led to exploitation of the tribals by the non-tribals, encroachment. It also led to social impact, that is, kinship network of the tribals were destroyed, and various cultural practices which were ingrained with the forest or which were related with forests started to get affected and ultimately got eliminated. It led to destruction of wildlife and forest. They were main source of food for the tribals. Malnutrition is prevalent among the tribals. One of the main factor is because they are prohibited from hunting, or rather the flora and fauna has got destroyed. It affected the biodiversity, thereby leading to poverty. There was also denial of social infrastructure in these forests. In the name of preserving the forest, the tribes were not given social infrastructure like education, healthcare, etc. So this also had a huge impact on the tribes. And then it also led to eviction, this led to destruction of their social network. So these are some points or key words that you have to mention and underline them in your answer. And then some examples. I have just mentioned some examples over here. See, for example, after the enactment of Wildlife Protection Act, the government, in order to preserve the wildlife, in order to preserve the forests, had to displace or remove the tribals from their traditional land. So, for example, Baigas and Gonds were displaced when Kanha tiger reserves were established. In Karnataka, tribals were displaced when again forest reserves were set up. Even in Assam, several tribes were displaced as a result of establishment of Orang National Park. So this we can see that not only when forests were being destroyed by the British, they were exploited. Even after independence, when forests were preserved, that was given importance, which affected the tribal way of life. So like this, you have to present your answer. So in the introduction part, write about the forest policies very briefly during the British and post-independence. Following that, write the impact. You can write the positive, negative impact first, and then a little bit about the positive impact that happened later on. And then you can draw a flow chart just to mention the different impact, like economic impact, social impact, political impact. You can write a flow chart. And then in the conclusion, you can write some recommendation or what can be done in order to address it. Like you can quote the example of Dr. Burman committee recommendation, which came up with a triangular forest policy approach where conservation, the tribal and the national needs, all of them has to go hand in hand. Something like that can be a positive, your conclusion, giving a positive outlook to your answer. Okay, so I hope this helps you understand what content you have to write for this particular question. So in the next video, let us discuss this particular question, that is, discuss the importance of common property resource in tribal area and analyze the threat faced by it. Okay, so you can write it and then watch the video so that you will be able to compare how your answer was and how to improve your answer. I hope it was useful. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.